Okay, so today we're going to talk about pinch pots, and this is square one when we talk about ceramics. This is what we always begin the idea of making vessels out of clay. Pinch pots are, kind of the original vessel. You see an example over there of a Nubian pinch pot. It can't get any more basic than that. And in fact, the tools used for this are simply your hands and a lump of clay, which is great. So this really kind of gets it back to basics. And from there we start with our nice big lump of clay here. And I can step over here. So I'm gonna take a little section of clay here, about a pound of clay, maybe a little bit less off of this bit of clay. We're gonna start with a ball of clay. And like I said, you're not using anything but your hands here. So your hands become your best tool. And if we imagine back in ancient history, that kind of makes sense. That we're all kind of born with those hands that can be our first and best tool. So once you've formed that into a pretty good ball, you can roll it around on the table to kind of get it nice and round. Really, the more round it is, kind of the better. All right. Now, once we have the clay in a nice round spherical form, we're going to take two elements that will be the main, do the heavy lifting for us here, and that's going to be your thumb and one of your fingers. Typically my pointer finger. So your thumb and your finger are what's at play here. And we're going to take your thumb and you're going to plunge your thumb into the core of that ball of clay, right to the very center, not through it, but just to the very center of it. And then we begin the pinching process. So just like the name says, we're going to just simply start doing a series of pinches. And those pinches are going to be, not the kind of pinches that you might expect. They're going to be really light pinches. And those light pinches are repeated ever so often as you rotate around the vessel. And you can see my non-dominant hand is kind of cradling the piece as I'm pinching out this vessel. And the more I rotate, the thinner the walls are getting, but they're getting thinner in a gradual way. I'm not wanting to try and speed this process. And the clay typically will be less likely to cooperate if you are trying to speed up this process. So you really have to kind of take an incremental steps to get to an even thickness. All right, so we're working around this, really checking. You can get a lot of sensitivity about how thick things are by gauging kind of manually around. You feel any places once you've kind of pinched it out into a form pretty well to see if there's any areas that are a little thin and any areas that might be a little thick. We want to really focus on the areas that still might feel a little thick and just ease those back out so that we have a wall thickness that is uniform all the way around, on the sides, across the bottom. Everything is uniform. And now that we're at that stage, we need to think about this as a vessel and as it might stand up. So we're going to need to take this rounded bottom here and tamp it on the table to flatten and create the bottom of your vessel. Keep it from rolling, establishes the bottom, and it never hurts to check again to see that everything is as even as possible from pinching out the vessel. Most common things that can go wrong is there's too much of a desire to go thin. Let these be a little thicker to start with. It's just going to be a little bit more to work with, and you won't have the challenge of it losing some of its shape, because the thinner the walls get, the more floppy it kind of gets, because this clay is quite wet right now, and it's not going to want to hold its shape if it's stretched to its limit, literally. So once we have kind of created the pinch pot, we're going to cut the pinch pot in half, and you can kind of see that the wall thickness is hopefully even all the way around. Now this is a pretty thick wall. I'll grant you, but it's consistent. And I think you want to, maybe strive for somewhat thinner walls eventually, but getting that consistency will allow you to really improve on the wall thickness. The thinner the walls, the lighter the pot, and that's very desirable as well. So you can see in this view how the pinching technique is taking place here and reaching down. Now you're going to be limited when it comes to a pinch pot to really how much clearance you have from this part of your thumb to your finger, because if you go any deeper, you obviously can't sort of do the pinch technique. So your pinch pots are going to typically be somewhat on the small side to start off with. I think it's also important to speak with one voice. In other words, let one hand do the pinching and one hand do the holding. We also see a lot of this at times, and that can almost feel like two people speaking to you at once for the clay, and the result can be uneven. So once again, we want to get to the even wall thickness on the bottom and on the sides. And that wall thickness is important as well, because that allows for this to dry at an even rate and then eventually be fired at an even rate. And we don't want any surprises in the kiln. So the more consistent everything is, the more less likelihood of surprises in the kiln. Now, if you look back to our Nubian pot, you can see that after the forming has taken place and your piece has gone to a little bit more leather hard, you have then the next phase, and that is kind of decorating the vessel and kind of identifying the different parts of the vessel. So when we get to a finished state with the fully pinched form vessel, now we want to start thinking about how we're going to activate this space. We have a natural bottom to this, or we'll call that the foot. We have the lip or the top edge of the vessel, and then the body is going to kind of be in between. So how can we delineate and kind of identify and decorate basically those areas? So one way is to, and the Nubian pot represents this nicely, is identify that lip area and kind of give it a nice finished edge working around there. And this is with a simple tool. I can see that I've entered a tool into this equation. You can certainly go without, but tools at the decorating stage, I think, could work nicely for you. And then thinking about the body area in the Nubian pot example, there was a stamped ankh design kind of all over to kind of give it a wallpaper of, if you will, decoration. We're going to do something kind of similar to that. You can also border the foot somewhat. This is a simple shift or simple barrier between. And this really elevates a form from being kind of a little more simple shape to something a little more sophisticated, a little bit more structured. And that is a good rule of thumb. So you can see that now I've kind of created a well-defined lip and a well-defined kind of foot area. And this gives me this canvas of space here to think about design work going into. And once again, I'm going to bring in a tool here to create a design. It can be sort of anything, really. And with this, in this case, it's kind of modified stamp. So stamping and lifting out to kind of get a repeated design that doesn't really take a lot to do, but over the span of the vessel, throughout the vessel, you can really gain a nice texture around that. So as you can see, once we've completed the design all the way around, it really activates that space. It's not perfect. It's not, it's not carefully constructed, but I don't think it really needs to be. It really kind of gives enough for you to go with. And it's never a bad thing if you have some kind of a rotating device here or decorator wheel to kind of use that to maybe get a new perspective on it and kind of gauge your work around it. And once this is dry and fired, we have wonderful places to consider glazing taking place. Now, the glazing or the colored slips that from ancient times may have been a little bit more muted, but you know, it's the same principle applies, thinking of the contrast between the lip and the body. On the Nubian example, an ochre kind of color was achieved. So this gives us kind of places to apply glaze once we're at that stage. So that's pinch pots. Next we're going to explore the coil method, and each one of these will build upon the next. And down the road, hope to explore with you the potter's wheel. So we'll see you next time, everybody.